Our sermon text this morning is a continuation of the readings that we've been doing through the letter to the Hebrews. And this morning we start at chapter 12, verse 4, in which we're encouraged to consider the hardships of life as opportunities for discipline while focusing on the glory that God has prepared for us. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And you have forgotten that word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? Our fathers disciplined us for a while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Make every effort to live in peace with all men, and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind, though he sought the blessing with tears. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Why even do the right thing? I mean, why fight for righteousness? Why not do whatever we feel like? I thought about this a lot this morning when I was being tailgated through Donnelly. I mean, tailgated so close, I could almost see the nose hairs of the dark-haired guy driving and the long blonde-haired woman who was with him in the black Toyota RAV4 Idaho license plate FL09958. It was that close. I thought about a brake check to see how much of a dent my trailer hitch would make. I thought about throwing something to see if I could maybe hit the windshield. And when we went up Little Donner Pass, I thought about an obscene gesture as they passed me so slowly that I had to hit the brakes to avoid going off the road when the passing lane ended. Why do the right thing? Especially if it's unlikely that you're going to be caught. I mean, sometimes we do the right thing, right, because there are legal or social consequences, but what if they're not? What if it has to do with your thoughts or something that you can get away with? Why do the right thing? Besides, as Christians, you know, Jesus will forgive you your sins. So why do it? In our text for today, which follows the last 2 weeks' readings in which the author of Hebrews tells us about all of these great heroes of the Bible who trusted God and did the right thing, sometimes impossible circumstances, we're told that we should fight for righteousness. That is, that we should pursue righteousness the way that these Bible heroes do. Because this month I've been talking about the powers that we have as Christians and kind of phrasing it in what is your superpower, it occurred to me this past week that, the difference between superheroes and supervillains is not the super part. It's not the powers. What it is the cause that they pursue, whether they pursue a righteous cause or not. So today, I want to take a deeper look into this passage that I just read and talk about why do right, why fight for righteousness. And the first thing I want to point out is that doing right reveals our identity. Hebrews says, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and you've forgotten that word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. And right away we have to ask, well, who does that? Who sheds their blood in order to resist sin? Oh yeah, Jesus did. In the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Scripture says that he sweat blood in his struggle, not against the people who were going to take him away, but his struggle against himself, because he was fully human and he was fully aware that he was about to be beaten and whipped and impaled on a cross. And he struggled so hard to do what he knew was his Father's will that he sweat blood. And some of these people to whom Hebrews was written, they themselves may have shed blood. Not long after this, because the Emperor Nero pursued persecution of Christians, and they had to decide, do I renounce being a Christian and avoid that pain and destruction, or do I admit that I'm a Christian and suffer for it, perhaps shedding my own blood? Because we all instinctively try to avoid suffering, right? But when we choose to suffer for the sake of Christ, we reveal who we really are on the inside. Not only are we servants of God, but that we're children of God. We're imitators of God. And this is why Hebrews goes on to quote this passage. It's from Proverbs chapter 3 that says, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or grow weary of his correction, because the Lord disciplines those whom he loves, as a father the son he delights in. It's not that all of our suffering, or even most of it, is the Lord disciplining us. Right? If you've had children, you know that, or been a child, you know that as a child, you're subject to lots of scrapes and bruises and accidents and illnesses. That just comes along with being a human being in this broken world. But there are times, if you had good parents, when you were disciplined, when you suffered for a good cause. I immediately had to think of a time when one of my kids ran out into the street, a street that was busy with traffic. And do you think I disciplined them? Oh yeah. I was angry, but I was angry because I was scared. And I was scared that they wouldn't learn this important life lesson, which is don't run out into a street, even after a ball, if there's traffic coming. And you know what? There were other parents there. None of them disciplined my kid. And I wouldn't have taken it upon myself. I would have pulled their kid out of the street, but I would have left it to them to discipline them. See, when we're disciplined by God, it shows that we belong to God. And this winnowing of the church that came through persecution, where people had to decide whether to publicly declare themselves as Christians, the suffering that they received for that, even though it came from an evil source, Hebrews encouraged them to see that as discipline. And of course, there'd be no great athletes or musicians or any great skill without discipline. But we understand that we have a loving God who knows everything, and he knows what we need to shape the most important part of us, which is our character, our inner identity. I think, sometimes we think that it's all about calling yourself a Christian, and people who call themselves Christians must be Christians, and those who don't aren't. But you know what? Non-Christians don't believe that. I don't think any of us really believe it if we think about it. I mean, we say actions speak louder than words. In 2017, you might remember there was a guy who was riding the MAX train in Portland, and he stabbed 2 people to death, and he severely wounded another one. And this was as part of a racist rant that he was going on. And I paid attention because just 10 years earlier, I'd lived in the area, and I would regularly take the Max if I was going downtown with my children. But it also struck me because when he was convicted, it was revealed that his name was Jeremy Christian. What you're called is not that important. What you do reveals your identity. What you think on the inside, your attitude reveals your identity. I couldn't help but contrast that with the Ten Boom family from they were Dutch clockmakers, watchmakers, and a couple of weeks ago, I told their story of how when the Nazis started sending Jewish people to concentration camps, they started taking in Jewish people in a hiding place in their house until they could safely get out of the country. And they rescued dozens and dozens of Jewish people before they were betrayed by a neighbor and went to a concentration camp. And only one person from the family, Corey, survived the camps. And why would they do that? They did it because it was who they were. They were Christians, not just in name, but in their hearts. They understood that this was the right thing to do. When we do the right thing, when we say the right thing, when we think the right thing, that reveals who we are. The second thing I want to point out is that doing right results in peace. Hebrews says, make every effort to live in peace with others and to be holy. You notice those two things are connected. See to it that no one misses the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. We might ask, what is this bitter root? Or maybe in our vernacular, what is this weed that grows up so quickly that has the power to split rocks, that can actually cause so much trouble for us and can defile many who are in contact with us? Well, Hebrews goes on to describe a couple of examples. And one of them is sexual immorality. Because it grows into addiction, it grows into idolatry, it becomes more important than your relationship with God, and it destroys lives. And it breaks apart families. Or, Hebrews said, another example is Esau. Esau, who doesn't seem like a bad guy when you read the Old Testament, but he was godless. What does that mean? That means that Esau was the first of two twins born to Isaac. He was the one who came out first, and therefore he was the one who would inherit the birthright. This was incredibly important in Hebrew culture. The first son was the one who basically inherited the family business. He would receive 2/3 of the inheritance, and his brother just 1/3. And he, in the case of Esau, would inherit the promise of God given to Abraham and Isaac, his father, that would be passed down. This promise that God would give them descendants like the stars and the land, and most of all, would create one of their descendants to be a blessing to all nations. But Esau didn't care. He was more interested when he came back from hunting in filling his stomach. He was hungry, and his brother offered him a bowl of lentil stew. And he said, oh, that smells so good. And his brother said, trade me your birthright. And he said, okay. And so Jacob became the one who received that birthright, the one who had to take seriously the promises of God and the position that he was in. You see, doing the right thing creates peace between us and God, and between us and our conscience. But also sometimes it creates peace between people. And doing the wrong thing, as Esau did, led to conflict between his descendants and Jacob's descendants. It doesn't always work between other people, but sometimes it does. It's the best we can do. Some of you may remember who Shirley Chisholm was. She was the first African-American woman who was elected to the U.S. Congress. And in 1972, she was in a heated campaign battle with George Wallace for the Democratic nomination to run for the presidency. And it was heated because she was an African-American woman and he was a segregationalist. if you remember anything about him, you might remember that he said, segregation today and segregation forever. He did not believe that African Americans were worthy of being intermixed with white Americans. And then he was shot in an assassination attempt. And Shirley Chisholm, instead of gloating about that, instead of taking advantage of that, went to the hospital to express her care for him and to pray with him. And Wallace's daughter said that that was so powerful that her father wept. And he began to change his position on segregation. Because that's sometimes what doing the right thing does. It creates peace between people. The third reason why we do the right thing, perhaps the greatest reason, is this: it reflects God's grace. The author of Hebrews says, "You come to God, the judge of all men, to spirits of righteousness made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than Abel." Now, Hebrews was obviously written to Jewish people. They knew all the stories, but we have to ask ourselves, what word did Abel's blood speak? I mean, if you remember the story at all, Abel was the brother of Cain, born to Adam and Eve, and Cain's sacrifice to God was rejected by God. We don't know why for sure, but it seems like he just went through the motions, right? Whereas Abel sacrificed to God wholeheartedly. He gave the first and the best from his crops. And Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's was not, which caused Cain to be jealous. And even though God warned him, Cain killed his brother. And God confronted Cain and said, "Cain, what have you done? Your brother's blood cries out for justice." You see, Abel had inadvertently become a sacrifice to God. But you and I are here because God's son, Jesus, Abel's descendant, no, a descendant of all people, good and bad, but Jesus intentionally became the sacrifice for us. The one who still spilled his blood knowing what he was going for, so that we could be traded the punishment we deserved for the pardon that he had earned for us through his righteousness. That's the good news, because we're all tempted to do the wrong thing, think the wrong thing, say the wrong thing. But we're empowered by the forgiveness, the grace of God given us in Jesus to reframe things, to see the world differently. This past week I read an article in which Thomas Tarrant told his story. Thomas Tarrant was raised in Mobile, Alabama during the height of racial tensions, and he was radicalized by the KKK. He became a violent Klansman. And one night he and a companion were planting a bomb outside of a Jewish businessman's house. And the police intervened. His companion was shot, and Thomas was taken to prison. He was sentenced to 30 years, plus another 5 years when he attempted an escape. And after that, he was put in solitary confinement for years. And he had nothing to do except read. So he read a lot of books, and finally he decided to read the Bible. He'd been raised as a nominal Christian, but he'd never really taken it to heart. And when he read it, he was convicted of his own depravity. He was convicted by passages like the one that we had for our Old Testament lesson, where God says he will draw people from all nations, from every tongue. Like our gospel lesson, where Jesus says people will come from the north and the south, the east and the west. He understood that what he had believed was not God's will, that he had done grave evil, and yet that God was willing, because of Jesus, to forgive him. And he changed. He changed so that he was given down the line the privilege of actually getting an education, so that he was actually released early from his sentence, and he became a pastor of a mixed-race congregation. And what could change a person so completely from the inside out? Only the gospel. Only the message of God's grace and his love for us. Because I don't know if you probably didn't notice, but I left out some verses in our sermon text. I left out verses 18 to 22, in which Hebrews describes people coming, the children of Israel, to Mount Sinai, where God gave his law. And it was in thunder and lightning and fire on the mountainside, and they were terrified, so much so that they said to Moses, "You go talk to him, we don't want to hear from God anymore." And Moses himself trembled, and God gave his law. And do you think that fear caused the children of Israel to obey God, to fulfill his plans for them? If you do, you haven't read the rest of the Old Testament, because absolutely not. They turned away from God all the time. They failed to obey God, even though he had chosen them for this great task. But what does change people is not the fear of the law. What changes us is the message of God's love, of his grace. That's what changes us from the inside out. It's not Mount Sinai, Hebrews said, it's Mount Zion. It's the mountain on which God's Son sacrificed himself out of love for us. That changes us. It enables us to come to the God, the judge of all men, without fear, but eagerly. Because of Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, a new arrangement, one that comes to us by grace as a free gift. And how do we respond to that? The only way we can, by loving God back. And how do we love God back? By obeying him. Not because we have to, but because it's who we are. And it leads to peace. And it reflects the grace of God that is ours in Jesus. Amen.